and welcome to season 15 of Gridiron Nation here on TSN. Yes, we are the source for Canadians in the NCAA, youth sports football, but we're going to stretch the coverage out a little bit more this year to talk about football in Canada and Canadians in football, no matter where they are. Joining me, John Hodge and Gord Randall on the panel this week. Let's get right into it from the NCAA perspective, guys. First to you, through week two, what is your perspective, Gord, on where we're at with Canadians in the NCAA? We always had headliners going into these years over the last 8 years or so with the Cornish Trophy, but there's no clear favorite. And if we have any group of favorites, they're really sitting on the defensive side of the ball, aren't they?
You took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, defense is kind of the theme so far early on here. And a lot of the names that you've heard us talking about over the last couple of years, if they are still in the college ranks as Canadians, are defensive guys. Akeem Messidor, Dario Jabome, Jet Elad. Those are the types of guys that I suspect that you'll be hearing us talk quite a bit about this year. There's a few new faces on that side of the ball that appear to be emerging a little bit as well. And I think the other theme is that the Scarlet and Scarlet Knights at Rutgers is actually from the Canadian flag now. That is the very clear Team Canada favorites in the NCAA this year, as they've collected a half a dozen Canadians on the roster, 3 or 4 of which I expect to be making pretty significant contributions for them. So I think those are some key storylines. And then looking ahead towards the end of the season, I think we're already seeing indications of who's going to be in the hunt for the college football playoff. And I think the team to watch, if you are a Canadian fan from that perspective, is probably the Miami Hurricanes and Akeem Messidor. I don't see a lot of other real possibilities for prominent Canadians. So I think as a Team Canada football fan, I think you should probably get on the Hurricanes bandwagon, because them being in that playoff means a lot more opportunity for us to see Akeem Messidor at the highest profile position in the sport at this point.
For me, the biggest headline right now in NCAA football from a Canadian perspective is Christian Veilleux. Where are you? We have been spoiled here in Canadian football, having Canadian quarterbacks having great seasons down south. Of course, reigning John Cornish Trophy winner Curtis Rourke, incredible season, was a legitimate Heisman candidate at Indiana in 2024. He's now with the San Francisco 49ers as a 7th-round NFL draft pick. But Veilleux, this is supposed to be his big year. It's his final year of collegiate eligibility, his second year at Georgia State. He started their season opening blowout loss to Ole Miss, threw a touchdown pass, but got pulled after throwing a pick. And gentlemen, he's no longer even the second player on that depth chart. He is the 3rd quarterback, having also fallen behind a late ad via the transfer portal. And according to the local reporting I could find, this is not an injury situation. This is a benching. And so for Veilleux to go from 1 to 3 in the span of 1 week, I don't think bodes well for him looking to potentially garner buzz heading into his draft year, maybe as a periphery NFL guy or as a CFL draft pick. So I'm watching for Christian Veilleux. Yes, there are some other Canadian quarterbacks in the NCAA ranks. None of them are really in positions to play in the short term. They're all younger, more developmental guys. This is supposed to be Veilleux's year, and he is not on the field.
Evan Stuba is in at the number 3 spot, John, and Blake Hebert is redshirting at Notre Dame. Those are real futures, guys. I mean, at least Chuba was at Washington State last year. He might have an opportunity to see some action, but our focus is not going to be on quarterbacks this year.
No, it won't. And that's too bad, right? At the game's most important position. That's not to say that guys at other spots don't deserve the spotlight. Obviously, in the media, we love to simultaneously tout the importance of the trenches and the O-line, the D-line. And then it's like, oh, awards time. Should we give this to an offensive lineman? And it's like, we don't do that. What is that nonsense? This is for quarterbacks and receivers. So it's nice in a way that we're giving an opportunity for offensive linemen to shine, for defensive players to shine. But as a Canadian football fan, it is a bit of a bummer not having a quarterback starting at the NCAA, as much as the future is bright at that position.
Gord, I want to jump in here because the one guy that we haven't mentioned is Boise State's Ty Benefield, who has had a great start to this season so far. He just continues to improve. He's consistent at that safety position. Can we oversimplify and say that it's Benefield versus Messidor, or is there a larger field here?
I mean, I think there is a larger field here, and that's not to downplay the contributions of those two players. But I think that there's potential for some names to come to the forefront. And the one right on the tip of my tongue is Antoine Raymond over at Rutgers, who has 3 touchdowns already through their first 2 games of the season on a pretty underrated Rutgers squad. And I know we've talked about them quite a bit on this program the last couple of years, largely because of Daryl Jabome last season. But Greg Schiano's gone back to that Rutgers program and built them into a rising program in the Big Ten and in a very, very tough conference. And so Raymond is looking like he was going to be a timeshare to start the year. He still is sharing some carries, but he's the guy that is the big playmaker and is making the splash plays for them. And as we kind of alluded to already in this discussion, those big sexy stats are the things that often drive these discussions. And so he has that working in his favor as well. When we talk about the trenches, we've got to mention 2 Canadian offensive lineman prospects that I think are rising and very strong prospects, having good starts to their season. Logan Taylor at Boston College and Albert Reese over at Mississippi State. Both of those guys have had an excellent start to their season. I believe neither of them had a lot of pressure through their first 2 games. And so that's really promising in the trenches as well.
I do think that it's nice to have a nice rounded out list of 8 to 10 guys who are in the mix for this award. I think all the names are appropriate, but I also think, Jim, you are bang on that this is Messidor and Benefield's lead right now. I mean, Messidor, this is year 6 for him. He's playing in one of the top defenses in the country. He had 1.5 sacks to close out Miami's season opening win over Notre Dame. He's been sensational. And Benefield, I mean, just with everything he's able to do, like they move him everywhere at Boise State. He's in the slot, he's in the box, he's playing up high, and his ability to make plays in a number of roles, I think, really has him standing out as a defender. Great size, 6'2", 205, and this program has received so much attention over the last while. He actually led Boise State in tackles last year because, of course, of the rise of Ashton Genty and getting an unlikely berth in the college football playoff in 2024. So I think this is a rising program. He's a rising player within it, and he's only a junior. So obviously he's still got another year of eligibility left beyond this, but the sky's the limit for Ty Benefield.
Well, and there's still a chance that he could do a Travis Hunter. He went into spring camp and played receiver for a while. He was actually recruited as a receiver until he shifted over to safety. So I'd like to see a game where he might actually play both sides of the ball. Guys, who's your NCAA Canadian of the week? And I'll go back to John.
Well, for me, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to pick 2. I'm going to take Rene Conga and Wesley Bailey at Louisville. And the reason I mention them is because they were both monsters in this game, a 28-14 win over James Madison. They combined for 15 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, and a pass knockdown. There are a lot of CFL teams that don't start 2 Canadian defensive linemen. Personally, I think it's great that Louisville is apparently heating the ratio. They got 2 ratio breakers on that defensive line, and they were both outstanding for that team this week.
I'm going to cheat in a different way, and I'm actually going to go back to week 0, even though you asked about week 1. And John, you alluded to it earlier, but Akeem Messidor was a huge factor down the stretch in that game. He had a phenomenal sequence in Notre Dame's last possession in what was a really big statement win for Miami over a team that was in the national final last year on opening weekend. And Miami, they had all the talent it appeared last year with Cam Ward at the helm to be a national title contender, and they chronically could not put games away on the defensive side. And Messidor made sure in the opening week that didn't happen. He had a hurry and then a sack and then another pressure right after that, almost forced the interception. He was all over the field when his defense needed it the most. And what that showed me is that he is emerging from not just being a factor, a contributor to that defense, but being one of the alphas on that defense who can maybe dictate games when it comes down to crunch time. And that was a huge development, in my opinion.
When we come back, we'll talk a little U Sports. Stick around.
This portion of Gridiron Nation is brought to you by Crown Produce. Keep it fresh, Canada.
Welcome back, everyone. Time to focus a little bit on U Sports here on the nation. And I don't know, over 15 years, how many times we've said the same old faces in the same old places. But that seems to be the case once again this year, early on in U Sports. You've got Saskatchewan really leading the pack in the West. Nice to see Regina joining them, the Purple Gang in Ontario with Laurier and Western, Montreal and Laval in Quebec. Why is it this way year in and year out, Gord?
I mean, I think to put it simply, recruiting drives a lot of this. But you also see one of the common threads amongst pretty much all those schools you mentioned is stability in the coaching staff. And that's not just the head coach position, it's also the coordinator positions. You see a lot of stability on these staffs. Western, for as powerful as they've been, they've lost some coordinators over the years, but they're not getting picked apart the way that, say, a program being that successful in the States would be picked apart with other schools looking to kind of hop on that bandwagon. And so keeping the band together has been the recipe for success for a lot of these schools. I think when you look at Michael Falls is a great example and what he's built at Laurier, you look at a lot of stability and a lot of pulling in the same direction. It's very clear that the university gave him a long-term mandate when they hired him, and they've largely stuck to that, and he's rewarded their faith. And so I think that that's one of the stories that keeps these programs near the top. And I would also add that Queens is sitting in their usual position in the OUA as well, which is looking like they're knocking on that door and just cannot quite get over the hump against both Western and Laurier right in those games every time they play them, but can't end up on the right side of any of them. So there's very clear pecking order in that conference, as there is in the rest of the conferences around the province. Or country, excuse me.
Yeah, the RSCQ always feels like it's a two-team conference, and that's a testament to the work that Montreal and Laval do. Two, of course, perennial powerhouses, very recent Vanier Cup champions. In the OUA, there do seem to be legitimate contenders. Like I'll put Guelph there. The problem with Guelph is they faced these two teams to start the season, and they got their doors blown off a little bit. I expect Guelph to win out the rest of the season and finish 6-2, but we've already seen that the Griffins aren't up to snuff quite yet head-to-head with these top two OUA teams. We've also seen, Windsor came up and challenged last year. They're not off to a tremendous start to this season. So whether it's Queens, Windsor, Guelph, there's lots of good teams, but right now they are still kind of second-tier teams in the OUA. And then as for Canada West, the conference that traditionally has the most parity, well, the two challengers to these two Saskatchewan teams are UBC and Manitoba. Well, the Thunderbirds just got their doors blown off, 51-14 at the hands of the Huskies. And the Bisons, who finished 7-1 and atop the regular season standings in Can West last year, are 0-2 with 23 points scored through 2 games. So personally, if I was a betting man, I really like the chances of seeing a Hardy Cup this year that is all Saskatchewan, Huskies and Rams. The question is, who hosts it? Can't wait to see.
CFL Scouting Bureau came out a couple of weeks ago. I think it's worth covering here because we've talked about this and the way it's developed over the last couple of years as we see fewer and fewer U Sports guys on this list. Well, we got 0 U Sports guys on this list this time around. Is this part of a cycle, or is this a problem that is here to stay, John?
I do think that it is partly cyclical. There's a lot of guys. Akeem Messidor would be one. He's 24 years old, right? And he's still competing at the collegiate level with the Miami Hurricanes. And that is somewhat of a COVID overhaul, right? Where we still have some very veteran players with eligibility. That obviously is going to change. But I also think some of this is here to stay. We have a couple of U Sports transfers on that list who would have made it had they remained at the U Sports level, but they've transferred down south. One of them being the reigning JP Metros Trophy winner, Gio Vaccaro, who transferred from the University of Manitoba down to Purdue, where he's looking to potentially garner some hype heading into the 2026 NFL draft as an interior blocker. So to me, I do think that we are going to see fewer U Sports players on these types of lists moving forward, but I don't expect that this will be the new norm, where there's 20 NCAA players and 0 U Sports, as much as I do think the list will get a little more American-oriented over time.
Well, and the key dynamic that has changed down south is that the advent of NIL, transfer portal, all that kind of stuff has allowed players more avenues to move around freely and more avenues to extend their career in the States. Akeem Mesidor a decade ago would have been out of eligibility already, and now he isn't anymore. And he's also on to his second school, which has now become the norm rather than the exception. And so what this does is a few things. It allows players who go down south from Canada and they don't hit at their first school, rather than their next move in a lot of cases being to bounce back to U Sports and to play on this side of the line, their move is now somewhere else in the States. And U Sports often only becomes an option once they've exhausted 2 or 3 different schools down south. And I think the other thing that it does is it opens up the floodgates going southward across that border as well. And you see more and more U Sports guys that are transferring down to the States. And that's quite simply because schools in the States now are used to having that consistent inward flux of talent throughout their eligibility, rather than having to focus their attention on freshmen coming out of high school and then the JUCO ranks. Now it's, well, hey, we exhaust all options for talent acquisition because that's how we have to survive in the transfer portal, the NIL era. And so that opens more doors for guys like Vaccaro to go down south, or guys like Devin Cromwell to go down south.
Who from U Sports has the ability to break through into that top 20 this year? Because there's a couple of these lists that come out throughout the course of the year. Is there any, and is that an issue for U Sports in terms of identifying the guy this year? Because usually at this stage, there's a Heck Creighton guy, or there's a guy that everybody focuses on. Is that a problem for U Sports as well right now?
I mean, I would say that one of the biggest challenges is figuring out, as you're going through the U Sports ranks, figuring out who's even eligible for this class. And I think part of that falls on the CFL. I think the CFL is far too opaque with their talent evaluation and their own eligibility process leading up to the draft. It's one thing that is a real peeve of mine with the CFL. But I also think that U Sports could do a better job of making it clear and promoting their own athletes as well. As I looked around the country trying to find an answer for this question, I had a very difficult time because most of the players that I was interested in and focusing on fell into either one of two categories. One was, well, they already have been drafted and they're finishing out their career at U Sports level, thinking like an Ethan Jordan at Laurier, for example. Or number two, I'm not sure that they're eligible yet. And so, a couple names from out west here that popped out that I wanted to talk about. Trey Montour, the receiver at UBC, has had an outstanding start to his season. Gone over 100 yards in both their first 2 games. Some really critical catches in their victory against Manitoba as well. But he's a guy who's only in his second year of eligibility. And Caleb Cunningham is another guy who is, I know that NFL scouts he's already on their radar at this point in time. A guy looking to continue the Theo Benedette, Gio Manu tradition of offensive tackles at UBC. But again, he's a guy that's officially only in his second year of eligibility. So I don't believe that he's eligible yet. The fact that I can't say that in concrete terms, though, is kind of the issue here. You'll see guys enter into the draft pool who are in their third year of eligibility, their fourth, their fifth, and it can get very, very complicated to keep track of all these things. It would be really nice to have a very clear black and white. What are we looking at here? Who's in the pool? Who isn't?
A name that I'd throw out for Heck Creighton is Arnaud Desjardins, quarterback of the Laval Rouge et Or. And I throw that out there because, first of all, I think Laval is the number 1 team in the country right now. All due respect to Laurier, who's right up there with them in the rankings. But also, we have seen in the past this being a little bit of a lifetime achievement award. And I think a guy like Desjardins, who, of course, now has a Vanier Cup ring to his name as a starter, is in a perfect position to do that. He might also lead the country in passing yardage. We'll have to wait and see, of course, but he would be atop my rankings for that. As for a guy who I think can make this top 20 list, I spoke to a number of CFL scouts, and many of them are very interested. And another UBC player I'll highlight is Benjamin Sangmua, linebacker and defensive back. He's played both roles. He's played corner. He's played some safety. He's now in the box. 6'2", 210 pounds. At UBC's pro day as an underclassman, he's been clocked anywhere from the low 4.5s to the 4.4s. Hasn't played a ton of football, born in Ghana. Only started playing football 1 year before he entered the U Sports ranks. But to me, the comp for him size-wise, positionally, at least as a loose fit, is Jackson Finley, who was a second-round pick of his hometown BC Lions last year out of Western. So for me, that is a player I would watch to rise up. He's tailor-made for the CFL. Every CFL team needs guys with that type of size and speed who can run around on specials and potentially become starters down the line, be it at safety, be it at corner, be it at Sam, right? There's a lot of positions available to a guy as versatile, as athletic as this. Sangmua led all prospects at the East-West Bowl in the broad jump with a jump of almost 11 feet. Like, the kid's athleticism is off the charts. So he's a player who I think could crack this top 20 list come the wintertime or the spring.
John, thanks for this. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Gord, hang on. We'll call you back at the end of the show. When we come back, the president and CEO of the OUA. Stick around.
This portion of Gridiron Nation is brought to you by NFL Canada.
Welcome back to the nation, everyone. CFC 50 Week 2 is out from CanadaFootballChat.com. Here is your top 10, and at the top of that list, it's the school that gave you Adjo. Harry Ainley in the number 1 spot for the second consecutive week, while Vancouver College slips from 6th to 7th. For more on prep and prospects in Canada, head over to CanadaFootballChat.com. Welcome back, everyone. Earlier this week on Monday, we had the opportunity to catch up with Gord Grace, the CEO and president of the OUA, talked a little OUA football, and we talked about a mutual friend who will be celebrated this Friday. Now joined by Gord Grace, the president and the CEO of the OUA. Gord, we've been talking a lot about the OUA on this show. One of the things that we didn't talk about is the apparent revival at York and Toronto, and it shows that there's a fluid nature in the OUA, that when programs really focus, they can turn things around. And we've been at this show for about 15 years. 15 years ago, we weren't saying that. What's changed?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us on, and thanks for talking about Ontario University athletics, in particular football. What has changed? Well, first of all, I think, being football guys, Jim, we can relate to the fact that it all starts with leadership. And I think that both programs have new leaders and have done a terrific job. That game went into overtime on the weekend. It was a great game. I watched it on OUA TV. I do feel like there's a greater sense of parity throughout the league than there has been ever maybe before, or at least in the last 20 years. So it's great to see the competitiveness from top to bottom. And hopefully it will remain that way over the next few weeks. We're almost halfway through the season, believe it or not. And there'll be a lot of important games coming up to determine who's going to make playoffs. And I think it'll be a dogfight right to the very end until game 8. So should be interesting season.
So much has changed in the world of college football, even just over the last couple of years. Now, you were involved stateside in terms of being involved with a program there. You were a parent of an athlete that was involved at Michigan. And you've seen things from both sides of the border with all of the changes, NIL, the money that's flowing, the demands that are being put on Canadian universities. What, in your mind, is the biggest challenge for colleges on this side of the border when it comes to this sport?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Whoa. Where do I start? Well, I would say this, that, I still go to Michigan games. I still track NCAA football, CFL football. I was at a junior football game in Ontario a couple of weeks ago. I go to our games. The one thing that I would say about the NCAA is that it's become even more professionalized. I mean, let's call it what it is. When you're making over $1 million a year, multiple millions of dollars, and you're probably getting paid at certain positions more than a backup quarterback in the NFL, that's professional sport. Ours is still authentic. It's still genuine. Our sport is still about, being part of a team and studying and being a student athlete, represent your school. But I would say this, because of the media attention to NCAA and professional football, including NFL. And I watched it last night. I watched the Bills pull out that last night against the Ravens. So I'm part of it too. We just don't have the platform to showcase ourselves. So I think to answer your question, I think the greatest threat is not the quality of our teams, the quality of our athletes, the quality of our coaching. It's getting better every year. It's just the opportunity to showcase ourselves and being relevant in a market where there's a lot of football opportunity, a lot of football for fans to see.
What do you see your programs out there doing on a case-by-case basis in terms of preparing themselves financially for an era that we're entering into with the economy right now, where there are challenges on multiple fronts? How important is philanthropy, donorship, and partnerships to maybe replacing that missing amount of money that may be coming from the government?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Third party support, if I can call it that, is critical more than it's ever been before. The reality in Ontario, and I'll speak to Ontario, is that our universities are facing significant financial pressure. There's been big changes in international students, and that's affected the finances of our universities. Our universities are working with the government to see how they can move that along. But I do think that there has to be some greater emphasis on gaining support from alumni, from the community, from corporate Canada to support what we do. And we're looking at those things. So, yeah, our schools are under a lot of financial pressure, and there's a trickle-down effect that is faced by our athletic departments, and we need to find ways to bring in revenues to our organization, to our schools, at a greater level than ever before.
Now, one thing I wanted to get in here was Team Ted Day coming up at the Hamilton Tiger Cats game on Friday. Now, Ted's a lifelong friend of you, friend of mine. I got to know him during his time out here at UBC. Managed to get out to Ontario and visit him a couple of times since the cancer diagnosis. That's been a real challenge to him and his loved ones and everyone in the Ticats organization. Ted is a unicorn, Gord. Here's a guy that coached at the U Sports level, at the junior level, an executive at the CFL level that helped bring great success to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers organization and a couple of others, and then got a job in his hometown as the general manager of the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and the Ticats are in first place right now. But outside of all of that, what can you tell us about Ted the friend, Ted the co-worker? Like, you were on a coaching staff together. What can you tell us about that?
Well, thanks, Jim, for bringing this up. I mean, Ted Goveia is a special guy. He's friends to a lot of people. It's something about his personality that you just want to hang around with the guy. And I've referenced before that Ted is a people connector. Like, he has an unbelievable network, but it goes beyond just knowing people. It's making people feel good about themselves. And as you said, I mean, Ted, his background, I'm not sure there hasn't been a level of football in Canada or a position in football in Canada that he hasn't participated in. From minor football to junior football to high school football to university football to CFL football. And of course, Ted, as part of his job, was very involved in scouting throughout the United States. So he knows the system there. But for a guy that's done all those jobs and worked himself up into different positions to now holding a position of being the general manager of the Hamilton Ticats, which is his team from his hometown, essentially. It's an amazing story, but it's not so much Ted's rise in all these, as special as that is. It's really about Ted himself and how he makes people feel and the connection he has with players, connection he has with coaches and other administrators. He's done it the right way, as we said it, along the way. And it's a heck of a tribute that the Ticats are putting this game on, the Ted game. It's great that it's his former team, the Blue Bombers, Winnipeg Blue Bombers, that are coming in, that he helped, win a couple Grey Cups with. So it should be a nice celebration of everything Ted's career has been about, but more importantly, in the relationships that he's built along the way.
Well, hats off to the Ticats organization. I know you and I were in discussions with Scott Mitchell. He brought up this idea about having a Ted game, and I'm really looking forward to it Friday night to see how they salute Teddy. So, Gord, thanks very much for coming on. Appreciate the time.
Okay, great. See you at the game.
When we come back, picks of the week. Hang around.
This portion of Gridiron Nation is brought to you by Crown Produce. Keep it fresh, Canada.
Welcome back, everyone, to the final segment. Time to start picking. You got a low-hanging pick there, Gord?
Yeah, I do. We talked about Miami on this show and being one of the teams to watch around the country this year. Well, they have an interesting matchup that might fly below the radar, but I'm keeping a close eye on as they host South Florida this week. Now, Miami number 5 in the country right now. You would think that this might be a bit of a cupcake, a layup game for them, non-conference, at home, all that kind of stuff, except what did South Florida do last week? They went into the swamp and they beat the Gators in Gainesville. And what did they do the week before that? Well, they kicked the you-know-what out of Boise State, who was in the college football playoff last year. There may not be a more upstart team around the country right now than South Florida, who is also coming off what was a fairly good season last year for them as well. So this is a program with serious positive momentum. Miami coming off a big opening week victory against Notre Dame. They cruised last week. They need to be sharp in this one, or they could be on upset watch pretty quickly as well. And as I noted in the Mario Cristobal era, Miami has had a habit of finding a way to trip over their own feet enough times to keep them out of the mix. So they need to run a clean slate here and go into ACC play in what's looking like a fairly middling ACC this year on an undefeated note and a high note.
What's the line on north of the line? You got a game there?
Yeah, I think the game to watch is very clearly edition number 1 this season of Laval Montreal, Rouge at Bleu. And historically in this matchup for the last number of years, it's been a matter of, do you hold serve? They typically play twice in the season, and the home team typically has to hold serve so they can get their deserved splits and they can meet back up in the Dunsmore Cup, and that's most years how it goes. So the focus, the spotlight, the pressure is on Montreal, who is hosting this first meeting of the two of them. They need to try and hold serve, and Laval is flying high. As John noted earlier in the show, Arnaud Desjardins is off to a fantastic start to the year. They are the reigning national champions. They look like the favorite in this one. So the Carabin are going to be in tough in a game that I think for their own aspirations is going to feel as close to must win as you can at this point so early on in the schedule.
Thanks very much for that, Gord. For everyone here on Gridiron Nation, this is Jim Mullin saying, let's get out to the game.